So, what about sex before marriage? One of the things I reflect upon as I think about the 40 years of ministry is the work that we did with preparing couples for their wedded life. And so we would spend time working with couples, talking them through the various things they would experience in marriage. And one of the topics, of course, was intimacy. And we always got a bit of a pushback when we talked about the value of waiting for marriage to engage in intimacy. And it was one of those things where people would say back to us, well, you don't buy a car without test driving it, right? And I was always a bit offended by the fact that you were comparing your spouse to a car purchase. But let's go deeper than that. You know, one of the things that is often said in these kinds of conversations is, well, it's just what the Bible says. And if the Bible says it, then that settles it. And I think for many people that may be enough. But I actually like to think about why is it that God may have given this prohibition? Like, is there a good reason beyond just, hey, be a moral person, wait for marriage? I have, over the years, found that there are actually some really good reasons to think about this as a wise move, not just a biblically obedient move. So let me talk through that. Why would God ask us to wait for marriage before we do intimacy? And I want to suggest three things. I think the first and maybe most significant reason is that there is a bonding effect when we are engaged in sex. The scriptures talk about it this way: the two become one flesh. And there's a mystery around that, but I think there's also something truly powerful about it. In fact, I had a chaplain who talked to us about this before our wedding and said it's like when sex is talked about in marriage, there's like a gluing effect, a bonding effect where the two become one. And so when people engage in this behavior before marriage, they are bonded in a premature fashion. Now, why is that significant? Well, one of the things I've noticed in counseling couples later, when they're starting to have trouble, is that the intimacy that they engaged in before marriage gave them a false sense of connectedness. It actually shielded things that they should have seen coming. But because the sex was great, they didn't see it. And so one of the reasons I think it's valuable to think about waiting is because it gives you a chance to see whatever else is going on in the relationship, to make sure that you have other things that bond you besides the physical act of sex. So that would be one. But there's also a second, and I think in some ways maybe even a more compelling reason, and that is to create trust-building experiences. One of the things I've noticed, for example, when Carol and I decided that we would wait for marriage, was that ended up becoming a really positive trait in our own experience as a couple. In other words, everything inside us before marriage wanted to show love. And it was pure, and we felt like there was no negotiation about whether or not there would be somebody else. We were convinced that we were for each other, so why wait then? Well, there's something about being able to resist temptation, to be able to say, no, we said we were going to wait, and then doing that. And then when you do that, you give each other an experience of being able to resist temptation. So in my life and in Carol's life, there was some things where we had to trust that when we traveled or when we were with other people, that we would be able to trust that person to remain chaste. And because we had experiences before marriage where we saw one another be able to stay true and pure, it gave us confidence that when they were in this new situation post-marriage, we would have a memory of them being able to say no, and it increased the trust factor. Now, that may seem like a really small thing, but I can tell you, especially for active couples who are engaged in the community and traveling and doing all kinds of things, being able to have that kind of trust is no small thing. So the first reason is, hey, I want to be able to make sure that our relationship is bonded over things beyond sex. And then I want to be able to have trust-building experiences that create a memory that serves me well later in the marriage. And then the third one is that there are times where you're going to be confronted with the question, perhaps from your own children, so did you guys stay true and pure? Were you able to hold yourself for marriage? And when you're having that conversation with your kids, I cannot tell you how good it feels to be able to say, look, we're not telling you something that we weren't also personally committed to doing ourselves. And there's a kind of credibility and confidence that you can communicate with when your kids ask you that question, when you have retained your own convictions about it. So all of those three things work together so powerfully. Now, if you're watching this and you're saying, oh man, I already messed up, I already didn't stay faithful. You know what? You could, from this day forward until your wedding day, say, you know what? Let's test this theory. Let's give ourselves to making sure everything else is good in our relationship and not just great sex. Let's give each other experiences that show we are worthy of trust. And then when it comes to having the conversation with our kids, we can say, you know what? There came a point in time when we made a decision. And for this last run, we did it that way. And we are so glad we did. And so, yeah, it's not a popular topic in our culture. Most people think I'm crazy for advocating for it. But I believe that there is wisdom in God's purposes that are worth paying attention to, even in this area. May God help you and God bless you.